Just a few minutes before I came on live today, the House of Representatives voted on the bill to require the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files. Now, just to be very clear, these are not the same files that came out last Wednesday. Those, about 20,000 documents, came from the Epstein estate, and those had been subpoenaed by the House Oversight Committee because the Democrats had forced it last August, if I recall correctly. And they released them as soon as the House came back into session after the 54-day shutdown. Now, one of the things that shutdown did is it forced House Speaker Mike Johnson, a Republican of Louisiana, to swear in Adelita Grijalva of Arizona, a Democrat who was elected on September 23rd. And as soon as she was elected, she signed the discharge petition to force a vote on this bill. And a discharge petition takes 218 votes. That's the number you need. And I'm going to try and come back to that in just a minute. Well, so the story of what happened between the time Grijalva signed the discharge petition and this moment, or the moment a few minutes ago when the bill actually passed, I'll tell you more about that in a second. The Trump administration and Trump himself put enormous pressure on the Republicans who had signed that discharge petition, and there were four of them, to switch their vote. Once the discharge petition is signed, there's no take backsies after that. So they were trying to get, especially Lauren Boebert, to cave and pull away her vote to stop it from going forward, stop the discharge petition from going forward. She refused to do so. The other signatories refused to do so as well. That would be Nancy Mace of South Carolina, whom Trump tried to chase by phone, Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, and Thomas Massie, a Republican of Kentucky, had all signed on, and they refused to take their votes away. That teed up the vote on this bill within 7 legislative days for the petition to cure, or to ripen, I guess they call it, and another 2 legislative days was the deadline by which the House Speaker had to bring up this bill. But on Sunday night at 9:15, Trump did a really dramatic change and said, I don't care, go ahead, hold the vote. We have nothing to hide. We just need to get this behind us because I'm doing such a great job as president, and nobody's listening to the fact I'm doing such a great job as president because of this bill that's hanging out there. And a lot of people in the comments asked, what on earth was he doing? And why did he suddenly switch? When he said, I don't care about having this bill pass, I don't care about the Epstein files coming out. That is ridiculous. This man has moved heaven and earth to try and hide what's in those files, which is really interesting because what has already come out from the Epstein estate is horrific. I mean, that right there are career-ending cards and emails and so on. And he is clearly all over these files. But those concern him less than whatever the FBI has in their material, which is what's at stake with this bill. These are the FBI files that were produced after Jeffrey Epstein got back into the news in about 2018, when the Miami Herald, I believe it was, began really to say, wait a minute, why did he get such a sweetheart deal in 2008 under Alexander Acosta, who is now Trump's Secretary of Labor? Let's take a real look at what this man was doing and has been doing since. And that's when the FBI really stepped in and started to dig in. And that's what is at stake with these files that we're all talking about. Now, Trump clearly cares deeply about making sure these don't come out. So why did he change his position? And I think the way to look at that is the fact that he had lost control of the House Republicans. Once the discharge petition had gone, thanks to those 4 votes, had gone forward, those 4 Republican votes had gone forward, and all the Democrats, the rumors over the weekend were that up to 100 Republicans were going to sign on to the bill saying you got to release these things. And the reason for that is because they are really caught between their loyalty to Donald Trump and their constituents who are very clear they wanted these things to come out. And Trump is very much a weakening figure. He is his mental acuity is slipping visibly by the day. You can look at if you're interested, take a look at his speech he gave in front of people from McDonald's yesterday. It was Not what one would normally expect of a United States president. Let's put it that way. His tariffs have been a disaster. We're facing inflation and now the potential for the um, Supreme Court to declare those tariffs unconstitutional. And with luck, I'll talk a little bit more about tariffs in a minute. People are extraordinarily unhappy with his deportation raids. This is a presidency that is already underwater. And the reason that the House members were starting to back away is because if he is more upset about what's in the FBI files than what was in the Epstein estate files, which were horrific, what is it? And nobody wants to be part of a cover up of whatever it is that's in those files that Trump himself thinks is horrific. So they're playing, they're sort of playing behind door number one, behind door number two stuff, right? So anyway, so Trump took a look at the fact he was losing control of the House of Representatives and the Republicans in the House of Representatives. And this is a huge issue for him. I mean, he has been able to do what he has been able to do to get out from underneath all of the indictments and impeachments and so on because the Republicans stood behind him. And on this, they are cleaving away from him. And it's not just on this, by the way, the embrace of many of his supporters, and now including Trump himself, of white nationalist Nick Fuentes is really splitting the party, and it's not clear that people who voted Trump are in fact willing to go full embrace of Adolf Hitler. So there's that going on as well. But so he decided to get out in front of it and to say, yeah, go ahead and do this. But be really careful about that because remember, if he really wanted this material out there, he could do it tomorrow. He could do it today. I mean, look what he did with other files like that of Amelia Earhart, right? He could just put these in the public domain, and he's not doing it. So it looks as if he is hoping that the Senate will bottle this bill up and it will not see the light of day. And let me get back to that in a second. So the vote, which took place just before I came on, um, was a vote. It passed by 427 to 1. The one person who voted against it was Clay Higgins, who's a Republican of Louisiana and a staunch Trump supporter. 7 people didn't vote. Split pretty evenly between the Democrats and the Republicans, and I can't remember which was which, if it was 4-3 or 3-4, but they were non-voters. And now it goes off to the Senate. And the real question is, and you could see if you want to listen to it, House Speaker Mike Johnson talked to reporters and made it really clear he's hoping the Senate is going to bottle this up, because in order to get through the Senate, it almost certainly will need 60 votes to invoke cloture, which will enable them to move forward. And that will require not only all the Republicans, all the Democrats, and those will certainly vote in favor of it, but a strong number of Republicans. And that's going to be really interesting because when Trump took office a second time around, the actual MAGA senators were not that many. There were probably about, we figured, between 12 and 15 who were true MAGA senators, but the rest of the Republicans were establishment type Republicans who didn't really like Trump. And again, the same conditions that induced House members to vote in favor of this bill are there for Senate members as well. And you know that because last night, Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama, a Republican from Alabama, said, yeah, he was going to vote for this measure since Trump had said, go ahead and vote for it. Well, Tuberville is hoping to become governor of Alabama, and it's pretty clear that he thinks a vote against releasing these files will hurt his chances of winning the governorship in Alabama, which is one heck of a statement when you think of how firmly Alabama has been behind Donald Trump. So all the senators have to do this same calculation. And again, I don't know what's in those files, but I know if Trump is this concerned about them, it's not good, right? Let's put it that way at the very least. And you can see a lot of right-wing MAGA influencers coming around to this position that there's something in there and they need to come out. So the Senate might bottle it up for sure, but they also might not. And Trump has already told reporters that if it comes to his desk, he will sign it. Like, frankly, at that point, he virtually has to. And that means at that point, I suspect that he will try to get the Department of Justice to bottle it up. And he said this when he put a Truth Social post up in which he said, yeah, go ahead. I don't care. He said, give the House Oversight Committee everything it is legally entitled to. And that seemed to me to be a neon flashing light saying, I'm going to make a real stink over what actually gets produced to that committee. Now, a lot of people, so this is not happening anytime soon. None of this is going to go away soon, but put that in your calculations too. If you are a Republican who is hoping to win office in 2026 or 2028, do you want this to drag on? I mean, this is a band aid you need to rip off because it is not going to be forgotten. And the last thing you want is for them to drop, say, August of 2028 or even of 2026 when the destruction for your party will be extraordinary. So they're all doing these calculations, I promise you, and trying to figure out not necessarily what's best for Trump any longer, because what used to be good for Trump was good for the Republican Party, but now what is good for themselves. Not even so much the Republican Party, which Trump has, of course, staffed with all his own people. So they're saying, go Trump, you're great. But a lot of people are not on board that train. They liked Trump so long as he could get them votes. It's not clear he can get them votes anymore, and in fact, he might be losing them votes, which is something that we saw in the November elections. So a lot of you, so we'll see which way what happens. It's not This is not something's going to be over this week or next. This is going to go on for a while. But a lot of you have asked about how do we know that these files haven't already been so butchered that there's not going to be anything in them. Well, we don't. We don't know who's got them. We don't know what's in them. But what I would say to you is this: think about, and this is what a historian does. Think about what how you find out something. And I think I talked about this the other day on some either this or some podcast. When I need to find something out doing history, I literally sit there and think, who knows this? Who would know the answer to this? And then I reach out to those in history. I reach out to the documents. I look for places I can find that information that of somebody who has that information. So, for example, when I was writing the book on Wounded Knee, a number of Lakotas take a train from what is now South Dakota to what is now Nevada. And I wanted to know what they did on that train, but they were not themselves people who kept diaries or had any kind of record left behind for something like a trip. They did have other records that were left behind, and they did actually do oral histories. But I wanted to know what they did on that train. So, you think about it, and I thought, how do I find out? How do I know what that train ride was like? And that took a little bit of time, but it turns out that at the Library of Congress, they have maps of where all the Union Pacific and Western lines ran during that year and where they went and where they stopped. So I could then figure out where those men had gone and where they stopped. And then I could go into diaries of those places to see what people had to say, not about those particular men, but about the kinds of atmospheres that you would have in those places and why those places were important on this train ride. So every time you try and think of who has something, you got to think about that. And that's a really difficult one to do, of course, because they were indigenous Americans on a generic train ride. I gave you that whole setup because these are some of the most powerful people in the world, the wealthiest people in the world. They were using electronic devices. They were traveling in modern conveniences that have things like airplane pilots. And they were in big areas with a lot of people. And then there were enough investigations into them that it certainly seems likely that a lot of people have seen that information or stuff like it. Because if there was stuff that was untoward, and we know there was going on with Jeffrey Epstein and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell. It's not just Americans who had information about that. So the big thing that I'm interested is the money change. Where did money go? Because we know at least $1.1 billion changed hands through Epstein's major accounts. Those are bank records. Those are not trying to find a Lakota in 1890. Those are modern day bank records. They're going to exist. And so too are at least pieces of all the different files that the FBI has. And again, think about it. Are there copies of things like the many, many videos we know the FBI took out of Epstein's New York City mansion? I'd make copies. I mean, I don't know if they exist or not, but before we get all tangled up in, oh my God, they're not going to exist, the dam is breaking. And I would be very surprised if at the end of the day, the answer is it's a dead end. Everything's been destroyed simply because there is so much. And one, of course, of the things that is so much are the survivors. There are more than 1,000 survivors who all have stories, who know who was with them, who know what happened, and who are clearly, to my mind anyway, being very cagey in public because they're terrified they're going to get sued by some of these very powerful men. But there are ways around that now, too. For example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican of Georgia, has said she will tell their stories on the floor of Congress. And thanks to the speech and debate clause on the floor of Congress, she can't be sued over that. So, lots of people are real concerned about what we're going to see. And I don't know what we're going to see, but I think we're going to see something. And I don't think it's going to be good. I think if stuff gets destroyed, people are going to keep at least some of the really bad stuff. And there were many, many, many thousands of hours of videotapes, for example, that the FBI took out of Jeffrey Epstein's house in New York. Every time Trump says, I didn't go to his island, what you should read is he doesn't say I never went to his New York mansion, because he went there all the time, or at least allegedly went there all the time. So I wouldn't get too tangled up in worrying about how this is going to come out. It's not going to come out tomorrow, and it's not going to come out all at once. But from my perspective, as somebody who searches for stories for a living, it will be much harder to hide this story than it will be to find this story. And that's not to say it couldn't be done, but I mean, right now, think about it. If you were trying to find this story, where would you go? I mean, you could make a list as long as your arm. I'd start with the banks, and you can move in the businesses, and you can move from there. But you could also do it the other way. You could start with some of the survivors. You could start with how they got tickets to come to the United States. Where did they stay when they got here? I mean, those are all things that investigative journalists can do, and do pretty easily. It's going to be a mess to do it, but I wouldn't lose a lot of sleep about that. And similarly, concerns that they will have been cut up, maybe, but boy, there's an awful lot of people you've got to silence in order for that to happen. Unlike, as I say, my Lakotas, who at that time were not famous in 1890, they were pretty easy to lose. Donald Trump and the very powerful men and women that surrounded Jeffrey Epstein in the 21st century, I think that's going to be a harder one to lose myself, if people really get interested in digging into it. All right, so you had a lot more questions, and let me get into them. I want to go back, first of all, on that note, to the tariffs, which I mentioned before. You asked what was happening with the tariffs that the Supreme Court is now considering the constitutionality of. And boy, could I have made that a messier sentence. Sorry about that. And Trump is frantic at the idea that the Supreme Court appears to be on the edge of saying, yes, they are unconstitutional. We got to unwind them and return the money that the U.S. government took in from those tariffs. He is dramatically exaggerating how much money has come in, and he is saying that having to return that money will be a national security catastrophe. He used the word catastrophe, not disaster, but catastrophe. Well, not really. If in fact they were unconstitutional, that shouldn't be a catastrophe, especially considering that 10 months ago we didn't have them and we seem to be humming along just fine. I think there's some different things going on with that, but the most important one to look at is one that one of the Congress critters referred to, and I'm afraid now I don't remember which one. It might have been Jamie Raskin of Maryland. It might not have been as well. In which that oh no, no, I know who it was. It was Jason Crow of Colorado, a Republican from Colorado named Jason Crow, who said, "Listen, what he has used the tariffs for is to pressure countries to give him golf deals and to put money in his pocket. And you have seen this most dramatically in Vietnam, which he slapped huge tariffs on and then got an adjustment to them pretty quickly when Vietnam just dashed through all kinds of the permitting that was required for him to put in a golf complex in that country, taking people's land and doing all kinds of stuff. And magically, the tariffs came down. Similarly, he is using the tariffs really to put pressure on Latin American countries that he feels are not treating his right wing allies well enough. And that's another thing that he is really using tariffs as geopolitical leverage. And that's very much a 19th century concept that I want to talk about a little bit more in a second. But it's also completely antithetical to the world that we have developed in the wake of World War II to knit together the nations of the world, the countries of the world, through a number of different ways, including the economy, to help prevent another world war. And he is very much leaning into the idea of 19th century imperialism. And that, I think, is where Venezuela comes in. Theoretically, he is doing it to protect America from incoming drugs, although the drug scourge that is really crippling the United States, although deaths have fallen since the for a number of reasons. But one of the things that happened under the Biden administration is it made Narcan very widely available, which helped to reverse overdoses. But the real drug that is a scourge in the United States, of course, is illegal fentanyl, and that doesn't come in through Venezuela. That is created from China's precursor chemicals that go to Mexico and then come in from Mexico primarily to the United States. Venezuela produces different drugs, including cocaine, but lots of people are not dying from cocaine in the United States the way they are from illegal fentanyl. So he says this is about drugs, but it certainly looks as increasingly as if he is trying to push the Maduro regime out of Venezuela. It is, interestingly enough, it is started out as a left wing government, but it is basically an authoritarian government. And authoritarian governments, regardless of how they got into power, tend always to look pretty much the same by the time they become authoritarian. And he seems to be putting enormous pressure on Venezuela, on the Venezuelan people to topple Maduro. Perhaps with the hope of putting somebody in there who is more willing to hand over partial control of the great oil reserves in Venezuela. But the last I heard, he has said he is now going to talk to Maduro. Maybe he will try and get that out of him without forcing regime change on that country. But there does seem to be this whole attempt for the United States to get aboard this sort of 19th century imperial push that you see out of places like Russia to create larger spheres of influence, to make the United States control the Western Hemisphere, which is what Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, said when he announced Operation Southern Spear, as he calls it, last Thursday or Friday. I don't remember which date. He literally said, we control we are the Western Hemisphere is our neighborhood, and we are going to police it, I think is what he said. So that, I think, is what's going on with that. Now, another question that you asked about is that um, is the Texas gerrymandering case that a circuit I think it was that a three judge panel today threw out, and what's going on with that. That's really quite interesting, because this Supreme Court said, and I don't remember the year off the top of my head, and I should, that it could not interfere with partisan gerrymandering, which, by the way, in my opinion, and from my knowledge of American history, is sorry, really sorry, because I don't use profanity in public, but is bullshit. Anyway, they have said they can't touch partisan gerrymandering, but they still have the right to step in and stop racial gerrymandering. So if you remember when the Texas legislature put through its measure to redistrict the state in the middle of the cycle, which is extraordinarily uncommon. What they kept saying is, this is partisan. This is partisan. It has nothing to do with race. This is partisan. Well, this three member panel, by a vote of 2-1, said, "Oh, come on, this is a racial gerrymander." And the person who wrote the opinion was actually a Trump appointee, I believe. At least he has commented widely on it, joined by an Obama appointee. The third person who did not object to the redistricting was a Reagan appointee. Anyway, it will now automatically go to the Supreme Court. And it's not clear what the Supreme Court will do, because what the judges said is, this is a racial gerrymander, and it is, you can't do it. We're going to toss it out. It will go to the Supreme Court, where there are many things the Supreme Court could do, including simply put a stay on it and drag their heels. So this new district map is the one they use in 2026, which has happened before. That's actually one of the key reasons that we have a majority in a Democratic majority, had a Democratic Republican majority in the House of Representatives in I think it was 2024, is because the Supreme Court delayed on getting rid of what was found to be an illegal gerrymander. Anyway, they could do that. There is the issue coming up that we have an election next year, and the courts are very reluctant to mess with maps right before an election because they think that's unfair. So it's possible that the Supreme Court will simply let this languish. They may step in. We don't know what will happen with that, but it's really interesting because it does not affect Proposition 50 in California, where the voters in California just said, we want, if you're going to redistrict, we're going to redistrict too, and give an advantage to Democrats in those districts until the year 2030. Theirs was not a permanent gerrymander; it was a brief gerrymander, and it too was explicitly partisan. So the two don't affect each other, and it is my gut sense, which has nothing to do with this really, but it is my gut sense that this really naked attempt to redistrict our votes for the benefit of politicians is backfiring. That American voters are like, forget this. We would actually like to be able to have districts that are not sewn up for one party or the other. The number of districts in this country that are actually contested districts where a member of either party could win is extraordinarily small. I want to say it's like 27 or 34, something really stupidly low like that. And I think you can see this in part by what's just happened in Indiana, where Trump and the governor of Indiana, Mike Braun, have been pushing really, really hard for a Republican gerrymander to take away the 2 Democratic seats out of the 9 seats that are in Indiana. And the Indiana legislature, it's a supermajority in the Indiana legislature for the Republicans. And the Indiana legislature said, no, we're not going to do it. The people just are furious. We are not going to do this. And I think people are paying attention. We do know, by the way, that neither Republicans nor Democrats like gerrymandering. It is unpopular across the political spectrum. All right, so a couple more questions you had today, just to be quick. I think the only one that I haven't really gotten to is what on earth happened today with Trump in front of Mohammed bin Salman, of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And that's actually, I think, 2 interesting things going on with that. It's worth watching some of what he said to reporters, because he, being Trump, because he was a bully and he was really offensive, and he was, I think, really, first of all, you have to remember the man is not fully in control of his faculties. At least that's my impression. But I think you also saw him trying to perform as an authoritarian. He was showing off for MBS. I'm as powerful as you are. I can order these, reporters around as you can. I can be as rude as you would be. And I think he that's interesting because then there was also a moment where he was sort of falsely chummy with MBS and sort of reached out and held his hand, and it certainly looks as if he is trying to get into MBS's good graces even more than he already is. That is, he certainly seems to be eager for allies and eager for allies who can help him out as his position in the United States is crumbling. And in order to get that, of course, he seems willing to make a deal for American military hardware that has a number of national security people very nervous because they're afraid it's going to end up in the hands of China. He is willing to make that deal, apparently, despite the fact that it means negotiating with MBS, who, of course, was the man behind the dismembering of Jamal Khashoggi, who was working for the Washington Post and was a U.S. resident at the time of his murder and dismemberment in a consulate. So it's an interesting dynamic, and mind you. I'm going to be a little bit of a naysayer on this one in terms of him dealing with MBS. The crisis in the Middle East for the past, not just the past 3 years, but even before that, with the rise of Iran as a power that was keeping the non-state actors like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis, able to challenge the states there, the countries there, and the governments of those countries, has meant that the Biden administration as well was working to sort of rejigger who had power and with whom we worked most closely in the Middle East. So while I am not happy about what Trump is doing, it's worth remembering that everybody has been knocked off their pins for the last at least 8 years, and before that, really, when Trump was moved the American embassy to Jerusalem and things like that. There's been a lot of shifting going on there. The full embrace of MBS, known sometimes as Bonesaw because of the attack on Khashoggi, is hideous. But there's a lot going on around that. What I'm interested in is Trump's apparent deep desire to be friends with this man, and in order to do that, to do things like giving him military hardware, and in addition to obviously the fact he is always keen to work with a government that has a ton of money. I think he's also quite anxious to see if he can make sure he's got friends in other countries as his position in the United States deteriorates.